Hey everyone, Jake Celebrokens here. Pretty sure I forgot to introduce myself in the actual episode. In case you don't make it to the end, if you like the podcast and or the ancillary review of books, please consider supporting us. Patreon would be cool, and just dropping us a rating or a comment or a social media share would be much appreciated. Okay, on to the show. A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Welcome to Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. We talk to writers, critics, scholars, academics, other podcasters sometimes, about books of science fiction, fantasy, horror, all kinds of sub and supra and para genres, trying to really get into them, sometimes out of them. Today, I am delighted to welcome to the show Eden Kupermintz. Eden writes and podcasts about science fiction, politics, theory, metal. We might say he is a master of webs by webs mastered. He curates Anarchy SF. He's the editor-in-chief at Heavy Blog is Heavy. He's written some cool stuff for the Ancillary Review of Books, and he is one of the hosts of the excellent podcast Death Sentence. Eden, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It is so nice to see you after many, years, I guess, of online correspondence. Yeah. So before we dive into it, and today, if people didn't know from the title of this episode, we're talking about the SILMARILLIon by J.R.R. Tolkien. Before we hop back to the past and the distant past and the even more distant past in the Silmarillion, what else have you been reading? Anything cool?
Yeah, I just got Water Black.
Cool.
The third installment in the Cities of the Weft series of books by Alex Feby. It's so good. I've only read the Dramatis Personae, but if you've read Feby's work, you know that he uses the Dramatis Personae to make all sorts of points. And it just seems like he has been unleashed in his like philosophical tendencies, and it's just like Platonist introduction into reality and so on. I can't wait to dive deeper and learn more about the atheistic crusade. I think he introduces that more deeply in this book. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I've also been reading House of Open Wounds.
Cool.
It's very, very good. I've actually never read, I need his name so that I pronounce it correctly in front of me. Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Yeah.
I haven't actually read the stuff that he became famous for, the space opera stuff, but I love his fantasy. So I'm on a fantasy bent right now, which is perfect for this episode.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's cool. I really dig House of Open Wounds and the rest of those books. There's a third one coming, I think, this year. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, they're good. I just finished a really exciting science fiction book, Transmutation Transients by Darkly Lem. It's coming out here in a little bit. Darkly Lem is a nom de plume of 5 writers who I don't have in front of me, so I don't remember all of them, but I know Cadwell Turnbull is one. And it was a delight. I didn't really know what to expect. It's this, it's kind of like a multiverse cloak and dagger kind of story. Like there's some kind of technology that lets people move between universes. And this very kind of fun, it's not magical, but it's sort of like, it's weirdly quirky the way it works. But it's just this sort of very playful with what it's doing. I was thinking a lot about how annoyed I get at like trope-based advertising and trope-based sort of like descriptions of work. And this is a really good example of some people who know a lot about how genre works and are really like playing with it in interesting ways. Yeah, there were a couple points where I was just putting the book down, just sort of like really impressed at how deeply and cleverly they do a couple like very, very kind of in your face seeming to info dump, but then stop before you get enough that actually helps in this way that's like really like someone like very unnaturally will kind of say like, as you know, this is how XYZ works. But before you get to Z and actually know and like enough to put it together, they're just kind of like, they go do something else. So you never actually put it together enough, and then it just jumps to a different scene entirely.
Interesting. A collective of writers writing a book is also an interesting idea. We just covered on Death Sentence, we covered Unknown Language. And that has a poet write the introduction, Hugh Lemmy, who is a queer theorist and podcaster, write the main section of the book, and then a scholar write the afterword. And I've been thinking a lot about Dragonlance and how it was written by 2 people, what that does to a book. This is how you lose the Time War, right? And where you can see the seams. I've also been reading Gog Magog and Lud Ludda,
Yeah, right.
written again by Jeff Noon and Stephen Beard.
Hmm.
It's an interesting idea writing a book with someone else, right? It's
Yeah.
supposed to be this really solitary exercise, and suddenly you have another person or four, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I've been listening to Going Rogue, Tenzin Gardam's
Yeah.
podcast, which is super good. You know, that's about films, obviously, but it's thinking about the way that it's so normal in film to understand that like story creation is a multi-person endeavor that lots of people have their hands in. And you know that's an extent, you know, it happens to some extent in writing with editors and stuff. But to think about it like consciously, multiple people coming together and being like, we're gonna write a novel. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty cool. That's what I'm reading. But let's put down these things currently. Let's hop back to the Silmarillion. So today we're talking about the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's the one you're either super into or super put off by. This was published posthumously, I believe in the 70s, 77 is what I've written down, about 4 years after Tolkien died. It is often referred to as a legendarium. It's a collection of mythic histories that inform his more famous work, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And although it's published after his death, Tolkien had been working on it basically his entire writing life, some ideas going back to at least 1914. Now, we could get into a lot of authorial and canon questions with this because Tolkien didn't put together the final published version. I really don't want to be honest. That's kind of not where my interest in this book lies, at least today. In brief, the Silmarillion tells about the creation of the world and then the struggles between various powers, races, and nations over many centuries and ages, running up to and indeed summarizing the Lord of the Rings. So before we kind of get into this, I wanted to ask you kind of what your relationship is with this book, if you remember when you first encountered it, or why it's a book that you've come back to and were interested in talking to. You know, we could have picked any Tolkien book or any book indeed at all to talk about today. So,
Okay, so Tolkien's fingerprints are all over not just fantasy writing, but writing period, right? He is one of the, even if you are anti-Tolkien, you're still defined by what Tolkien was, right? The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and the Hobbit are some of the best-selling books of all time, definitely of the 20th century, and they came to define this entire genre, especially fantasy. But out of all of them, the Silmarillion is the least read, especially widely. Right? There are people out there who have read The Hobbit and they've read Lord of the Rings and have never read Silmarillion. And to be honest, I think one of the parts of Tolkien's genius is you don't have to. You can read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and not read the Silmarillion and not miss out on pretty much anything. But if you do read the Silmarillion, it turns, especially the Lord of the Rings, into something so much richer. The last book that my mom read me before I started reading myself was Treasure Island.
Oh, cool.
But then the first book that I read myself was The Hobbit. It was so formative in who I am and how I read. And immediately after I finished it, I moved on to The Lord of the Rings and actually I was living in the UK at the time, and I actually finished The Lord of the Rings in Scotland. So the landscape, the weather, the heritage, everything was coming together for me. And then for years, well, it seems like years to me because I was a teenager, right? Those days seem so long and so on. I was looking for more of that stuff, and I don't remember who exactly put it in my hands, but someone said, well, you know, there's another book called The Silmarillion. It's very different from what you've read so far, but you should read it. I got this gorgeous edition. I don't even remember who the publisher is now. It has the Fall of Gondolin on the cover with the elvish runes in gold on the edges. And I just devoured it. I could not stop reading it. I read it in one of those, frenzies. I read it in like 48 hours. I stopped, I didn't go outside. I just read the book because I was engrossed with this idea of scale. I've spoken about this many times on Death Sentence and in other places, also on Ancillary Review of Books, when I reviewed The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits. This idea of zooming out that Tolkien does in this book, but also then zooming into individual stories and tying it into what he wrote, basically turned this into one of my favorite books of all time. It's my favorite Tolkien work. I have reread it. I've reread The Lord of the Rings 3-4 times. I've reread this 5 or 6. There's such a wealth of, strip everything away, just really great prose. It's Tolkien at his least processed. He is writing a myth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it reads like, if you're like me and you've done your stint in reading the myths, the national myths of Europe and other places, it reads like the Calivela, the Mabigonion, the Matter of Britain, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
You'll recognize the rhythms, you'll recognize the repetitions, the word choices, and so on. And for me, that's just fascinating. I love that stuff. So yeah, my relationship with it is intense
Yeah.
and long-standing. I mentioned to you that I have several editions. I'm known for my love of this book, so one of my friends bought me a first edition for my wedding.
That's so cool.
Very, very cool. And that's it, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we as I was saying in the run up that I'm try to not be precious about books, and I'm pretty good at not being precious about books, but I do lust after the folio edition of the Silmarillion. That's one I could imagine if I like found a $500 bill on the street. Do they make those?
You would go and buy the
Yeah,
folio edition.
but
Silmarillion. The only folio edition that I own is the Book of the New Sun.
mhm.
That edition is just absolutely gorgeous, and also I got my mom to buy it for me for a birthday, so that was
Yeah,
kind of
nice.
like my excuse to get something like that.
Yeah, the only ones I have are Kindred and Left Hand, which were wedding presents. So yeah,
That
that's
is a really good
yep,
choice.
yep.
I have a signed edition of The Left Hand of Darkness, also a
Oh,
present.
nice.
So
Yep.
okay, enough about
Okay. Listeners, if you are stuck on what to get someone for a wedding present and they're a book person,
also
the-
Le Guin first edition.
get them a folio or a first edition, and they will talk about it on podcasts years later.
100%.
So yeah. My relationship with this, I think, is kind of similar. You know, I went through the very early. My dad read me The Hobbit aloud. You know, I read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings very early. And I found the Silmarillion. It was on the library shelf at my little tiny library in my little tiny town. Like my current apartment is bigger than the library in my hometown. Like, my hometown is tiny.
Yeah.
And it was the hardback library edition. It had the fold out map, like it was like
Yep.
in fours, you know, with the
Yep.
red ink. I remember of Beleriand.
Right.
But yeah, I read it. I was immediately sucked into it, and you know, I loved as a kid. I loved mythology. You know, I just ate up all the Greek mythology I could find. I read the King James Old Testament Bible quite a bit, which, you know, this does not have that same rhythm, but there's some similarities in the kind of the
sure.
pacing. I really like that thing you said about the kind of like zooming in, zooming out, the scale. I've thought about reading this sometimes as sort of like telescoping, how like
Yeah.
sometimes things are very clear but very far away, and other times like very up close, and it kind of moves between those. But the thing about this book, and this is without question one of the most important books to me. Like every couple of years, I try to kind of go through and check sort of like what are my kind of like top 5, top 7 books. Like if I had to go on a trip and, you know, reread a bunch, you know, or if I had to grab them on the way out, and these are the only books I could have. And the Silmarillion is always on it. There's only 1 or 2 books that I've maybe read more than this, and it's a book that I come back to be open about it. Like when I'm really depressed, there's nothing else that quite sort of meets me the way this does. And we can talk about why, but just that's something that whenever I've been at sort of like dark points in a year, like I will always pick this up. Not that I don't pick it up at other times, but to the extent that when my wife saw me reading it for this podcast, she immediately came up to me and very seriously said, "Is everything okay?"
Are you good?
Yeah. And I mean, no, it's not depression, it's podcasting. There's a difference.
Difference, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, and we'll probably talk about this, but one of the things that this is doing kind of thematically is thinking a lot about what is good and right and sort of enduring, even if things are generally going downhill and like disaster is generally imminent, sort of like what's valuable anyways. And that's something I always come back to. And it's just packed. There's so much in here with so many different ways to read it. And every time I come back to it, something about it jumps out at me differently.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to tell people about the experience of reading this book is that it's actually made up of sub-books. And even more than the Lord of the Rings, they are self-contained units to a high degree. And actually, I really like that the estate has been publishing some of the stories as standalones. The Children of Urien, The Fall of Gondolin, Beren and Luthien, and so on and so forth. That's actually a really clever way to do it, but you don't have to read this cover to cover. You don't have to read the creation story at all. You can just skip ahead and read the parts that are impactful for you. In fact, when I read it today, there are some parts of it that I know by heart, right? And I don't read them. It also depends on the mood and so on. And then the other thing I wanted to say, to just connect to what you said about dark places and endurance and so on. I think this book is also the hardest book for a certain critic of Tolkien to read because it problematizes a lot of the more shallow criticisms that are levied against Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is one of the most maligned books, right? It's almost fashionable to not like the Lord of the Rings. And it's also fashionable in very specific circles to say that it's fascist, white Christian, ethno-nationalist, and all sorts of nonsense like that. And maybe the worst one, conservative, right? And Lord of the Rings, in many ways, is a much simpler book, so it's easier to criticize it that way. But then when you read the Silmarillion, all of those criticisms are made that much more complicated and that much more awkward. It's not to say that they're all completely wrong. Tolkien had some very conservative ideas and some very, of his time notions of politics and so on. But what people say about, for example, that Lord of the Rings is about light versus darkness. It's just not true, especially if you read the Silmarillion and suddenly there are these very complex notions of light and dark and good and evil and morality and so on. And that's why that's one of the things I love it for, is that it takes one of supposedly the more straightforward franchises, for lack of a better word, and just problematizes it in all sorts of really interesting ways.
Yeah, well, it's also, I wanted to throw out at the beginning of this episode, so I'll stick it in here now, that this is an anti-lore podcast. That's my general, my general stance is like I am opposed to the wiki-ization of literature that means a lot. So listeners, if you happen to catch weird errors I make, just put that away in your heart as you're superior to me and don't tell me about it. But the reason I bring that up now is one of the things about the Silmarillion that complicates it so much is specifically, I think, elves. And I want to circle back to this because, reading The Lord of the Rings today, we are reading it post the genre of fantasy being created, right?
Right.
Reading The Lord of the Rings now as opposed to when it comes out, everyone has this sort of I don't know, it's like one of those like when cows vomit up in their mouth and then chew it and then swallow it again,
regurgitated.
Yeah, our conception of what the elves look like and the dwarves look like and how the wizards look like and how it all works. You're not reading The Lord of the Rings, period. You're reading The Lord of the Rings with this sort of filter on it of how that got picked up by many other imitators and by Dungeons and Dragons and many other things. And then we put it back onto the original in a way that shapes it in ways that it's not there in the original. And I think that that simplicity, that light versus dark, and this idea of you sort of have you have good heroic men, you have little heroic hobbits, you got little heroic dwarves, you got the elves that are sprightly magical twinks, and it's really simplified, right? And then you read this and you have to realize that no, Tolkien's doing something much weirder than this. He's not making Dungeons and Dragons races. He is trying to talk about something about I don't know, the mythic experience of being in the world itself. And the fact that the Silmarillion is almost entirely about elves with a huge asterisk because the two coolest stories are not about elves. But, it's so much about the elves that you start having to really think about what he's doing with them. What does he mean by them? What are they to them as beings? And I should also note, just for the podcast, that we'll be saying men probably a lot when we mean humans, just because that's the way the book talks about it.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I think out of all the sections of the Silmarillion, the one that I keep coming back to is the Flight of the Noldor, and the events that will inspire immediately before it and immediately after it, because it has some of the more interesting characters. Of course, Tolkien was drawing heavily from the doomed hero, right? In general, one of the myths that are not usually brought up when you discuss Tolkien, and that's a real shame, is Siegfried and the Dragon. Tolkien absolutely adored Siegfried and the Dragon in those stories, and they inform a lot of Lord of the Rings. And the idea of a hero that is already doomed by his very heroics just echoes through the entire book, and especially when you talk about the elves. Right? The idea, the elves are literally doomed. Right? Mandos, the god of death, dooms them when they flee the Undying Lands. One of the best passages of the book, by the way, is the Doom, and then Finol's retort, right? And I can almost like recite those two things. My handle, not my handle, there's like a snippet on Discord you can put below your username is "Let the cowards keep this city," right? Which is what Fëanor says about the Elven city, and spurs them on. And then you start to get all these really interesting characters. Chief amongst them is, I think, is Fingolfin. Right?
Yeah.
This hero, as you read the book, you're like, okay, when is this guy gonna die? It's just a there's like a clock ticking above his head, and Tolkien, that's actually one of his least subtle storylines. Like, when is this guy going to die? But then he deploys those expectations in a very interesting way. He puts him again and again and again and again in these doomed situations, and yet he somehow perseveres. And even the elves comment on it. And he builds that up and builds it up and builds it up for the finale, right? Like, his death is one of the best parts of the book, and does this thing that Tolkien really likes to do, which is, friends, there's evil and there's evil, right? There's like bad stuff, and then there's this like pure personified essence of hatred and evil. And that's the thing that gets to kill the good, right? The lesser evils don't. The great evil does, right? And then the last thing I'm going to say here, and how it ties back into this weirdness, is that he goes back and he says, there was also good and good.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But we no longer have the capital G good. And we are left with these lowercase g good people. Right, we're left with Fëanor and Fingolfin, and to a lesser extent the men heroes like Turin and so on and so forth. And he keeps reminding you how flawed they really are, right? And how because there's no longer the capital G good behind them, there's always a limit to what they can do and what they can create and what they can achieve. And that's my favorite part of the Noldor and the elves and how Tolkien uses them.
That's interesting. Did you see that Kate Wagner is doing a series on The Ring?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like the Tolkien podcast is a form that has enjoyed a lot of popularity in the last like 5 to 10 years, even before Rings of Power. Or someone we both really enjoy his works, Jared Pekacek, who wrote The West Passage. He has a Tolkien podcast, By the Bywater. And there's Tea with Tolkien and a bunch of other really good podcasts, and now a show, right? So it's like a moment almost of revival.
But if you need some like really good Siegfried analysis, Wagner's got you covered. She's such a good writer. I love reading her stuff.
Yeah, Wagner is really good.
Boy, a bunch of thoughts. One of them being, like I said, I've come back to this a lot, as have you. And when I read this back in the first Trump presidency, a phrase that I can't believe
you have to say,
all three of those words are together. One of the things I really noticed reading it, was noting the sort of like proto-nativist kind of approach that Fëanor has to getting the Noldor to go to Middle-earth. And it's one of the more, one of the layers that I was noticing reading it this time is how much land issues and like dispossession and migration, this is like one of the things about this as a fantasy world is that it is in a way literally terra nullius, right? Like, it's literally unoccupied land, and the first person there kind of claims it in a way that mostly didn't really happen in human history, at least in like the last 10, 20,000 years or whatever. And I was just noticing a lot how much Tolkien, again, without like he doesn't put around any of the elves like a little like info bubble, like, hey, this guy's bad actually, except maybe for like, I don't know, like Moiglin, or there's a few characters that he does, but Fëanor is in many ways the hero, or at least the instigator of this whole thing. But he also, right, is like the great traitor. He leads these like great betrayals and kinslayings, and uses this, I don't know, populist demagoguery kind of talk is as part of what he's doing. And it was making me think a lot about how many of the plot lines in here have to do with, this group of elves is moving to this place and sort of slightly dispossessing the people that were there before. These groups of men are coming over the mountains and need a new place to be. And then later, way later, the Numenorians kind of like recolonizing, going back east and like setting themselves up as kings and enslavers in these occupied lands, and how much that is in there in the background in a way that it's not in your face in the Lord of the Rings, but that's like the history of the land that they're walking on in the Lord of the Rings is this very contested space, and this
Yeah,
kind of gives you a sense of that.
100%. I think there are echoes of it in the Lord of the Rings in the comparison between the cities and the open spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you also see Tolkien's kind of rambling, a very British tradition of walking on the land and
Mm-hmm.
knowing the land by your feet and so on. Fëanor specifically equates in his speech between the bordered undying lands
Mm-hmm.
and how the elves long for the open spaces of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Valar, there is everything good, everything that they need. They're undying. They have all that they need, not just by the way, like for your stomach to be full, so not the basic necessities, but also everything you need to prosper
Mm-hmm.
and create the Silmarils
Right.
and so on. And yet they long for something more.
Mm-hmm.
I think what is often missed in this, when people analyze this is also Tolkien's anti-modernism, right?
Right, yeah.
Tolkien had a lot of problems, and you have to remember when he was born, right, in the early 20th century, well, the late 19th century actually
Mm-hmm.
born, but he grew up in the early 20th century, and he had this experience of the fourth industrial revolution of
Mm-hmm.
smog, factories, dirty cities, again, pre-World War II, pre-welfare state, right, with these crumbling houses and crumbling infrastructure, and then the countryside, the cleanliness of the air,
Mm-hmm.
knowing everyone by name. This stark contrast repeats again and again and again. And that's the first thing I want to say. The second one, my handle, my bio, sorry, I don't know why I keep saying handle, on Twitter and Blue Sky always includes Fëanor was right.
Mm.
And I want to like expand on that for a second. It connects to what you said. So
Uh-huh.
remember how I said the like levels of good.
Mm-hmm.
So at the top of Tolkien's hierarchy of good is Ilúvatar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he is this sort of Spinozian god, right? He
Mm.
doesn't interact with the world. He is the primo movens, right? He is the first mover of reality, this Platonist kind of god. And I believe that is Tolkien's spirit in the Trinity, right? It's not the Father or the Son, it's the
Okay.
Holy Ghost, right? And then below him, you have Manwë, who is the Father, right? He is the part of God that is acting on the world, right? He does things, he sends people, he commands them, he makes things happen, and so on and so forth. And then the Son is Eärendil, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the elf who comes back. I mean, he literally dies and lives again. He literally forces the Father to show compassion. He is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other end, you need primordial evil,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't exist. So question mark there. Like, Tolkien was not a Manichaean, right? There was
yeah.
no evil is not a force; it is a lack of good.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you go down the hierarchy, you need the devil, right? You need Satan, and then below him, that's Morgoth, right? The original betrayer, the original rebel, the person who is good and has potential but won't follow the divine plan and therefore falls from grace. And then at the bottom, you need man,
Mm-hmm.
right? The sinner at the bottom of the evil hierarchy is man. And Fëanor, even though he's an elf, right, he represents the sins of humanity. And the sin is, you've given me all these tools. What do you mean I can't use them? You've given me intellect. You've given me freedom. You've given me craftsmanship. Why are you confining me? Right? Why won't you let me create and roam and live and so on? And here's the thing. I don't think Tolkien meant it this way because he's Christian. But when I read it, I go, yeah,
Right.
you're absolutely correct.
Uh-huh.
Like, why would the Valar give you or Ilúvatar even give you the wisdom and the skill and the craft to create the Silmarils and then get mad at you for creating them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So as a kid, when I was reading it, I was like, oh no, he's going to ruin everything. And this is how, and I wish I could go back to the Undying Lands. And as an adult, I'm like, fuck you. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, I don't want to go to the
Mm-hmm.
Undying Lands. What do you mean? I want to live. I want to experience life. I resonate with Fëanor more than anything.
Huh.
It's so interesting that this is a testament to Tolkien's craft, right? That all of these subtleties are in there. I usually think
Mm.
that if I can read the opposite idea in an author's work than what I know they intended,
Mm-hmm.
that is a testament to this to the quality of their
Mm-hmm.
craft. That they
Huh.
didn't stifle it to fit their vision.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
that's my
interesting.
Fëanor rant. Thank
Yeah.
you, by the way. I have never found a stage to rant about this
Oh,
anywhere.
cool.
I always wanted to. I want to write an essay, like
Mm.
diving deeper into
Mm.
this. This is the first time I kind of like let it out.
Yeah.
People look at me really weird when I say that because of I get why the kinslaying and the burning of the ships and everything
Right.
that
Yeah.
comes after. But inherently, that speech, by the way, if anybody's listening and doesn't want to read the Silmarillion and just wants to read this speech, you can just Google Fëanor speech,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the one you'll get. And I really recommend reading it because it's also very, very beautifully written.
That's interesting, and I like you pointing out that like Tolkien probably didn't intend that particular reading.
Yeah,
That underscores a sort of Miltonian
I was gonna. Yeah,
note that's already there. So that's good.
yeah, it's 100%. Milton writing Paradise Lost and going, "Hey guys, this Lucifer guy is kind of cool."
Uh-huh.
I don't know
Sure.
if you meant to write him like this,
Right.
but he's pretty awesome. Same
Uh-huh.
thing here. Like you look at Fëanor, he's like the fastest, the best, the smartest, the most
Mm-hmm.
fierce, the most loyal to his family, right, to
Mm-hmm.
his own people. And it's like, wait, I'm supposed to disagree with this guy?
Uh-huh.
I kind of agree with him on anything.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's good. That's interesting. I want to again, one of the just every time I read this book, I sort of have a few questions that sort of like become sort of that reading for me. And one of them this time, and I know lots of ink has been spilled about this. There's an entire field of study on Tolkien, even setting aside all the fan writing that's out there.
Yeah.
There's so many books, but is what are the elves, and what are they doing in Tolkien's kind of mythic construction that he's doing here? Because one thing we probably won't have time to get into it too much, but I know you mentioned it when we were talking about beforehand. Is that one of the things that Tolkien is doing in the Lord of the Rings and in the Silmarillion was like making a myth for England, right? And like there is a way to read the Silmarillion as like drawing a line, obviously not in a historical way, but in this mythic way to like the actual reality we're in, right? There's this
Yeah.
way that this is not a quote unquote fully secondary world, but there's a way to read, obviously like the Numenorians as Atlantean, and sort of like the way to sort of like reorganize a lot of mythic principles that are already in the world and connect them to our actual lived history. But sort of in that, taking that like sort of in brief, and we don't have time to expand that too much, but what are the elves doing? And I was just thinking about that a lot here, and if they're sort of paragons or sort of, I don't know, the idea of like a sort of like heroic figure of what a person can do, if they're sort of elevated in a certain way. When you read The Hobbit, they're just these like elves who just kind of like flit around and sing songs and they're funny. And then you read The Lord of the Rings, and you do get like, you get Legolas, who you get to spend some time with, who is this kind of like cool elf guy. And then you get the sort of glimpse of these sort of like serious, severe elder races, right? Like Galadriel and Elrond, and you get these sort of glimpses of this like more, I don't know how to put it, almost angelic in like a old, like they're kind of scary,
Yeah. Be not afraid.
Yeah. But then when you read the Silmarillion and you see them, you get more of a glimpse of how that works and how they are more than just people, and they have this sort of fire in them, and they have this power in them that sort of scales to how much they have seen the light of heaven, basically, right? Like the elves that travel to the promised land and see the light of the trees have like a kind of literal power in them that exceeds others. But you also see them as these kind of squabbling, scheming, not always very like efficient or smart, definitely not always moral, kind of backstabbing each other. There is the big bad in here, right? You have your big capital E evil in here, but a lot of the worst parts of the books are just when the Sons of Fëanor decided we're going to like slaughter this little village because we heard there's a Silmaril there and just kill the women and children. And it makes you rethink at what Tolkien is doing with the elves generally.
So I think Tolkien, one of the powers that moved him is this, again, contrary to the criticism that he's a conservative, is this understanding that we cannot go back, right?
Mm.
The world dwindles in one direction, right? Away from its glory. And the promise of its reconstitution is always in the future, right? Which again is a Christian millenarian idea. Millenarians, importantly, well, after the 18th century, no longer think that Christ is actually coming, because so many people said that Christ is coming and he never came that they had to pivot. I don't want to get into the specifics, but Swedenborg is a very important name in this regard. The kingdom is not actually going to come. The second coming is a spiritual second coming. Right? It is something in us that needs to change, and not a physical person descending from the sky. Of course, that gets reverted in evangelical American Christianity and so on. But for Tolkien's tradition, that's how it works. We cannot literally go back. Okay, so what do we do? If we cannot go back and we are always deteriorating, what hope is there? I think that's the question that he asked himself. And again, whenever we talk about Tolkien, we have to talk about World War I and World War II and the horrors that he saw as a soldier and the horrors that he heard about and so on and so forth. What do you do? Or, to quote Helm's Deep, how can man stand against such hatred? Right? That is Tolkien asking you and himself that question. So what's the solution? The solution is Numenor. Right? Everything dwindles. It comes to this point of inflection in Numenor. Right? The elven heritage and skill and craft suddenly reflares. And of course, evil will always destroy it. Right? Evil will always topple it down. But even as it topples it down, it spreads it far and wide. Right? And if you think about Aragorn is, if we read it today, very racist. Oh, that you have the blood of this specific people running through you, so you are inherently better than anybody else. But blood here in genetics, it's not because he's the son of someone. It's because the light of the undying land still runs through his veins, diluted over many, many generations. But that is literally the only thing that we can do is hark back to the grandeur of these people. So the elves are these, of course, unchronologically specified, better men that existed before us. Right? They're scholars and the writers of the folk stories and the heroes that were in them, they knew better than us what was good and just and correct and so on. But that very knowledge is what was their downfall. And all that we can do is kind of think about how we can live like them, how we can come to embody them. Now, the horrible things, people always say Tolkien is a Nietzschean. And they say it as a criticism, right? Because Nietzsche equals Nazis and whatever. But Tolkien is a Nietzschean in a very deep way. As Nietzsche himself wrote, the master is fucked up. He's a fucked up person. If you look at him as a non-master, he looks to be cruel and capricious and violent, and he is. That's the point. Nietzsche never tried to say that he's not. Tolkien is the same thing. Yes, these elves are masters. They bend the world to their will, but they also trample people under their hooves, and they also put their own interests above everybody else. Like Gondolin is awful, right? It's almost America first, right? It's this isolationist city that says, we're good. We have all the magic. We have all the power. The rest of you can die as far as we're concerned. So again, it's very subtle. It's very complicated. There is no simple solution to the question of how can the master be good if he inflicts so much pain on others. And if you read Nietzsche as well, it's not solved. People like to say that it's solved, but it's not. Same thing with Tolkien. So the elves, for me at least, are this comment on the power that came before us, the people that walked before us, and understanding that, yes, they were inherently better than us, which is the part I don't agree with and is the conservative part of Tolkien's idea, but also the awful things they had to do in the name of that superiority and that power that they had. How can we emulate them without that part? The answer, of course, is Christ. Right? The answer is, it is Tolkien. Like, to be clear, I'm not saying he was not Christian. He was very, very Christian, very, very faithful. And the answer is Aragorn, who is the just Christian king, who in him, with the flickering light of man, right, the mortality of man, what's the word I'm looking for? Metals, the unbending immortality of the elves. He has the light, but he knows it will fade, so he has the humility to be the merciful king. That's kind of squaring the circle that Tolkien tried to do, again, for Christ. It's a very common Christian apology, right?
And it's Arthurian as well, right? Of course, like
for
putting
sure,
those two together, yeah.
So by the way, it's funny you should mention that. I have to cite one page of the Silmarillion. I did a whole episode on it. Sentence. I just read that page. In my edition, this is like 247 to 249. It's the end of the Akalabeth. One of the weirdest parts of the Silmarillion, where Tolkien basically takes the Silmarillion into the modern era. And like the world becomes round instead of flat, and it's very obviously about our modern life. And he says there that we are looking to go back, right? We're looking for the solution. How can we find a straight road in a world of round ones? And he doesn't say it because he's not C.S. Lewis. Right. But the answer is Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Right?
I mean, that's that whole like, and by the way, I'm just putting like a circle around like in my own notes to come back to the Nietzsche and Tolkien. So I'm not sure about that. I want to think about that. But Lewis, would do, what was his analogy with with like ducks having webbed feet? Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Yeah. I don't remember the quote.
It's basically like, that like animals are made for their environment and they're only happy when they're in their environment. And humans are fundamentally unhappy because we're made for like a better world, right? That's not here. And we sort of long for this more spiritual, pure world. I want to think about that master Nietzschean thing a bit. One question I had, this feels like inappropriate because it's such a different level, but what the heck were they eating in Gondolin? Do they have like hydroponics? Like, what's the deal? Like, it's like this giant city. There's at least like, they have a standing army of at least 10,000. I'm not going to do the math on this, but I'm like, what are they eating in there? What's the deal?
There's a YouTuber, I don't remember his name. God, I'll have to find a video essay he did on why Fallout New Vegas is better than Fallout 3.
Okay.
And his thing is that when you walk around in New Vegas, you see farms. The game has thought about what people are eating. He makes this point that that's what separates truly great works of fiction that they have this, and I completely disagree. New Vegas is better because it's better written,
right?
Not because the world makes sense.
They've done the calorie count, and that makes them a better writer.
Yeah, exactly. I get what they were saying. To be a bit more like charitable, I understand. It's more fleshed out. Someone had thought about it all the way through. Okay, but I'm not going to quote John Harrison again. World building is the great clumping foot of nerdism and so on. Gondolin probably ate light from the air. I don't know, fruit from the trees.
It's not important. That's the thing about this is, and one of the things I find so interesting about that sort of telescoping we're talking about, and honestly, this is true of The Lord of the Rings too, it's just kind of more in your face here, is Tolkien's ability to move between like these very mythic, right? Like, I mean, the opening of the Silmarillion, right, and the creation of the world is this really beautiful, very clearly extremely mythic, very metaphorical, right? Poetic. And then parts of this have this very like, I'm reading a classic fable or myth, like something from the Edda, or something from Greek mythology, where like you get it, it's kind of working on a mythic level, but then it has these points where it kind of like zooms down, and for a second you get the person, and they feel like they're very in their body, and they're very in that space, and you're kind of up close, and it has that sort of lived reality for a moment. And he'll do that just at the turn of a sentence. He'll go from this very on high view down. Even early on in, there's a line that always makes me chuckle when I read it, in the part where they're talking about the Vala, who are like gods, the powers of the world. When Aule has made the dwarves, because he's gotten impatient waiting for elves and men to come, so he makes the dwarves.
Which is also very funny.
Yeah, which is good. And then, when God basically comes down and is like, okay, I see what you're doing, but you got to wait. Mine come first. I get it. But then when Yavanna, goes and basically, they don't name them in the Silmarillion, but basically like gets permission to start the Ents and comes back to Aule and explains, with great happiness, there will be shepherds of trees, there will be things looking out after living things. And it says, Aule says, nonetheless, they will have need of wood, and keeps on working. It's just this little like marital thing. It's like, but they're gonna have to cut some trees down. But that sort of collapsing of frames, or like in Beren Luthien's story, which is just great, and it combines, you can see some of the things that he's lifting from mythology, right? As well as the sort of original things he's doing. That's a very fun story. It's very, very good. But that has this epic scale, and then it zooms down to these little, I think of Beren holding Finrod in the dungeon, right?
Yeah.
And this sort of moment of despair in the dark. And then we'll kind of pull back again, and you learn that, they go basically to heaven and then come back, right? But that's very like zoomed out. And I really enjoy that sort of collapsing and
100%. And I think that reading the Silmarillion, and that's why I recommend that people do that, starts to do it to the other books as well. Right? Lord of the Rings, for example, which is also good at this zooming in and out. The first watchtower that the Fellowship sleeps in, or on top of, it's one of Gil-galad's towers that he built to defend his kingdom. And then you can say, well, who's Gil-galad? And then you find out about the kingdoms of the elves. And you can say, well, who are the elves? And you can find out about like everything starts to telescope into these small moments, right? When you've read the Silmarillion, okay, Peter Jackson, his specter haunts this conversation, right? We cannot not talk about him.
All right, it's time.
It's time. So I love the movies. Okay, it's become kind of. I'm starting to see that it's cool to not like the movies, which is terrible.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Oh, you don't like the movies? That's fine.
I have a complicated. The way I would put this is that I think that the individual movies have varying levels of goodness, and I think Fellowship is like genuinely
the best one.
Both a great film, even if Tolkien like didn't exist. I think that is a good film, and it is a wonderful, loving, great. Work in tribute to the original. I kind of feel like as a whole, they are bad, maybe capital B bad, in the sense that they are sort of like closing off imaginative and spiritually rejuvenating avenues.
Yeah, so I agree with that 100%. I love them despite of that, right?
Okay.
They are a canonizing event, right? Well, now you're not allowed to say that Legolas was this because that's not what was in the Peter Jackson book.
Right, yeah.
And you're like, there's a whole book out there that has all this stuff that's not in the book. And people focus on the wrong things as well. Like Tom Bombadil is not in the movies. I don't care. Tom Bombadil is terrible.
I think he's cool, but he doesn't belong in the movies.
He also doesn't belong in the books. I think he's cool, but there should have been an editor that came in and said, you don't need this. This doesn't serve anything.
Okay. Huh.
Although then we wouldn't have the fan theory that Tom Bombadil is like an ancient Cthulhu-like evil. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to what I wanted to say. One of the reasons that I love the books is that the movies is that I read the Silmarillion before I watched them. Obviously, they came out when I was like in my 20s or whatever, or a bit earlier than that. And it's one of the shots that encapsulate this when I want to tell people about it is when you see the tree of Gondor for the first time. And Jackson did phenomenal work showing you how it's a shadow of a shadow of a shadow. Did I get there's like 50 generations between them. That's the idea. It's like a sapling of the trees in Gondolin, who are themselves a sapling of the original trees in the Undying Lands. And it's such a good, when you've read the Silmarillion, that scene becomes more than just an establishing shot, which is what it does in the movie. It establishes Denethor and so on. You look at it and you're like, right, like this world is a mirror of a mirror of a mirror. And it just lands that home. And I think, by the way, that's what the Fellowship does better than. So I think Fellowship is really good. Two Towers is good. And I have started to dislike Return of the King the more times I watched it because it's really too epic and like too focused on the battles. I want to talk about war, by the way, Tolkien war.
Right.
But the Fellowship, what it does so well is that feeling. Of they're walking in the ruins of something better, something grander, and that telescoping of the last scene on the riverbank, the giant statues with the palms and the water flowing, and then zoom in on the bickering, the betrayal, Sam and Frodo's, I'm leaving without you, no you're not, and all like it's really, really well done, and I agree with you that Fellowship is by far the best movie because it captured that intimacy inside the grandeur.
I got to like consciously claw back from making this a Jackson. I do. So I'm gonna throw out my. How many things can I throw out quickly? All right, I'm gonna throw out 3 really quickly. Which one is that I do think that Tolkien. I do think that Tolkien's works have strong elements of racism and eugenics, and I think they are there. And I think Jackson thought, wouldn't it be cool if those were more in your face and more racist? And I think that's a problem. 2, this is super minor, but I'm a Justice for Gimli guy. Gimli is like so badass in the book, and they made him into like this like comedic
Comic
relief.
relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like, when Aragorn is thinking about, like, oh, shit, we might have to take this ring through Mordor, like, ourselves, he's like, it's going to be me and Gimli. Like, no way am I screwing around with anybody else. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's a side thing. But 3, and this is the smallest and the silliest, and I spent, like, 7 hours online researching this. Why do elves have pointy ears? That's not Jackson's fault, but it's, like, cemented it forever.
Yeah. It was the last coffin in that question.
Yeah.
I think
just
out of yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to make the podcast about this. We're here to talk about the Silmarillion, but listeners, they don't have pointy ears. Expunge that from your mind. Just
yeah.
oof.
So
let's get back to the Silmarillion. What's going to take us back? What's going to take us back to the Silmarillion?
I want to touch on your first point, and I think
Okay.
that will take us back.
All right.
I 100% agree with you, and I think one of the main damages of the movies is again that very clear vision of light versus dark. It's very accentuated in the movies because it sells tickets, right? If you think about the rest of Hollywood's narratives, that's the narratives that put asses in seats, right? A big hero, big bad, they clash, they destroy each other, and then good somehow comes back out of the ashes and so on. And like you said, that's all in the books, to be clear. That's all in the books, and the racism is in the books, and the eugenics are in the books. Like I said, Aragorn is mega racist, right?
Right.
This entire like bloodline idea and so on. And then it is ratcheted up in order to sell tickets and make this grand epic, and it's kind of put you in your face. And then the Silmarillion, I think, can help you ratchet it down.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Read a lot more about actually fathers mess up their sons,
Yeah.
right? And actually being insular. What's the name of the king in the caves, the Thousand Caves?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Bad. Don't be introspective and just look at your own works and your own culture and your own deeds, because it will cause you to atrophy away. And again, the racism and the eugenics and all that stuff is in the Silmarillion as well. I'm not saying that it's not, but there's also so much more in there that contradicts it and problematizes it. And again, reminds us that Tolkien was a person. And we know that he was not a Nazi. Like, he was flagrantly not a Nazi.
Right.
And he was not like a, what's that asshole? The British fascist. He was not a fascist. So, okay, those people can go screw themselves, right? They're not complicated. I'm not interested in problematizing them. They should just be fought against and left in their coffins for all of time. But someone who was a conservative and was closer to them than I would like,
right,
but was still a person with ideas and complexities and thoughts and so on, I think it's really fascinating. And a lot is lost by saying, throw him in the bin, right? He is this like chauvinistic, misogynist, racist dude, without reading the Silmarillion, which is a work that, problematizes a lot
totally.
Of that. And this is a good segue to war, but I don't know if this is where you want to take us.
We can talk about war. I got a couple things on the list here.
Yeah, so this is the main damage that the movies did. This is the main damage.
Right.
The Lord of the Rings is about battles, right? And don't get me wrong, Helm's Deep is awesome.
Helm's Deep is cool.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It's great. Legolas skateboards on the shield, and they do the.
Oh, you're talking about the film? Oh, I disagree that the film version is cool.
No, it's cool in like a dude's rock kind of way. It's
okay,
a good
all right.
scene. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
It's well produced. The choreography is good. The stunts are good, but it takes up so much of the movie. And then he does the same thing with Return of the King. Right, the Battle of Pelennor Fields in the book is like what? It's like 2 paragraphs. Legolas does not like I don't remember what he does, like alley-oops and Oliphant or whatever.
he knows scopes, snipes an elephant.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's not that's not in the book, and like the combat in the books, Silmarillion has so many battles, but they're all like, this was awful. Many people died. It destroyed everything, and the survivors were worse off than they were.
Yeah, right.
And that's it. There are 2 like big action scenes that take up the book, and that's Feanor's challenge to Morgoth, and then like 100 Balrogs tearing him apart, and my favorite part of the Silmarillion, Aure Aeon Teluva, they shall come again, right? Húrin standing on the corpse of his commander and chopping down. He says that phrase 70 times, right? As he's killing orcs. Those are the only scenes where Tolkien really like zooms in and says, and this guy swung his axe and then that guy blocked it. But also, it's not like Zelazny or Vance or any of those guys.
There's this interesting way where a lot of the Silmarillion, and I assume like if people are listening this far on the podcast, they probably know what the Silmarillion is about. But this idea that like these 3 MacGuffins have been stolen, we want to get them back. It's basically impossible. But what it becomes is it becomes a story about containment and like this need for vigilance. And over again, you get this idea of like these core values of being faithful. And I do think there is something about like friendship and companionship, even here being something that's like really vital, that what you really need to do is like hold fast to the people you know, and that we need to be resistant to evil, and we need to watch out for evil. We need to fight evil when it shows up. But there's really said pretty explicitly in like every chapter of the Silmarillion is that you can't win with battles, right? That like there's never a hope that even the most amazing elvish army will win. That's never on the table. And the elves don't necessarily know that, right? Or don't want to acknowledge that. But the book knows that. The Valar knows that. You, the reader, know that this is all kind of for nothing. Tolkien talks about how the elves in the early days are sort of stronger and more vigorous, but not wiser, not more beautiful. That's something that like care and sorrow and time on the earth bring to them later. And you get this, I don't know, this sort of impression of this person who has fought in a war, who has seen another giant war take place, with just absolutely no faith that any military might, no matter how glorious, can actually make the world better or actually change things. And that sits side by side with this very firm belief that we do need to resist evil. And that's what you do have to do, right? You have to try to keep Angband under siege, even if you have no hope of taking it out. And that's just one of those themes of the book that I really love. And it's one of those things that I come back to. Yeah, that moment with Hurin resisting, all of the times in Beren and Luthien's story, where it seems like all is lost and you just have to kind of keep struggling. And that may not be enough, right? Like lots of people in this book keep struggling and then they die anyway. But it's this, I think that ties to a kind of older, maybe even pre-Christian ethic that Tolkien is very interested in this idea that's like, what's right is not necessarily what always works, and that just because you're doing the right thing and trying as hard as you can doesn't mean that you will always succeed, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. It's something he's very interested in, and I don't know, that's one of those things that I find very comforting about this. We should take this moment to take a really quick break, and then we'll come back. We'll pick up this again. And I also maybe want to pick up Turin a little bit, because I think this connects in.
So you mentioned Turin, and you can't talk about Turin without talking about Hurin.
Right.
And Hurin is actually a really good segue to what you said about war, because what happens to him after the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears is that he gets chained to a chair and forced to see the unfolding tragedy of time, basically. Like the worst punishment that Morgoth, the worst person to have ever existed, can imagine is for someone to just see the world. Just your eyes are open like in a mechanical orange kind of deal.
Right, yeah. I love that, like, literally Satan is like, the worst punishment I can think of for you is you're not allowed to log off, right?
You have to be online.
You have to be online.
He has like a bunch of screens and it's all Twitter and he has to watch it. Yep. But it's like this idea that, the tragedy is the recurring of these events. They have no hope because hope is inside and no one will stop to look at it, except for one guy, Turin Turenbauer.
Right.
And then that's kind of the segue into Turin. So what do you want to talk about with Turin? There's a lot to talk about with him.
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to talk about with him, obviously, so you talked about how the Silmarillion is multiple books that can all be kind of read separately. They're all kind of doing their own things. And then you have these two big stories that are both like in text represented as being like almost like Reader's Digest versions of longer tales, right? Songs. You have Baron Luthien, which is about a man and a half elf, half Maya, which is like half angelic being getting one of the Silmarils, and starting the line that leads to Aragorn way down the road. And then you have Turambar, which is, I mean, it's basically Kalervo, it's basically the Kalevala, but it's incredibly tragic. So it's this mirror image in a lot of ways to Beren, even though like genealogically, like Turin and Tuor are the two that are, obviously like kind of in line with each other, parallel. But there's this way where like Turin looks like this could be the same kind of story again, but instead it's just unrelentingly tragic. And as an aside, by the way, something I was thinking about reading this is how one of the things that Tolkien is really good at, and I fear that a modern editor would chop out of a lot of similar works, is he's really good at repeating things, repeating themes. There's when Orome finds the elves for the first time when they're waking up, that's mirrored when Finrod Felagund finds the first men when they're waking up. The way that the Silmarils work here is very similar to the way the Arkenstone works in The Hobbit.
Yeah.
There's multiple like star-crossed lovers who meet in a wood and are sort of like frozen at the sight of each other, and then lots of stuff happens. And he's really good at setting up doublings and mirrors, and the more you think about it, there's sort of more of them. So like in the Lord of the Rings, the classic is you have Frodo, who is sort of a mirror of Bilbo, who you've already met before. Frodo is also sort of a weird mirror with Sam, who's like his like lower class, earthier component to the more like elvish Frodo. Then, of course, obviously you have Gollum, who is Frodo, right, or Bilbo, sort of mirrored in this dark version. And then, of course, Gollum has mirrors within him, right? And we have Slinker and Stinker. You've got Smeagol there as well. And then, of course, Gollum is also mirrored with Sam. So you get all of these like doubles and reflectings going on. And again, that's something where these sort of repeats of like, don't you already have that character? Didn't you kind of already have somebody do that? That's something I can imagine getting trimmed out today. And it's so rich here. And it's what makes the tragedy of Turin, one of the things that makes the tragedy of Turin so interesting, is that this vision of like this heroic, one of the mightiest warriors of the age, who like has a chance to win, the hand of an elf maid, who goes through great terrors and escapes, who winds up slaying a dragon, right? Like seems to mirror these other heroes, but it's all tragic. The thing that I was thinking a lot about with Turin this time, and I don't know what to say about this, it was really striking me, is when you have a universe with a kind of like omnipresent eschatology, the way that Tolkien does, where everything's ending, everything's always ending. That's the elves are going into the west, things are turning to shit. It's the age of men, it's always happening everywhere. When you have these sort of like this idea that like the main big evil things can't be overthrown by normal means, they will win normally. That runs the risk of kind of victimizing everything, right? And sort of making everyone just a sort of passive recipient of the evils of the world. And the thing that I was thinking a lot about with Turin that then made me look back on other storylines in Silmarillion, made me look at Frodo a little differently, is how, he is a victim, right? Like Satan has set his sights on this guy and he gets him.
Yeah.
Job line, right? But he's also an agent the whole time.
Right.
He never gives up, Tolkien never gives up the idea that Turin is choosing things, trying to do things. He's striving. He's not just like a leaf in the breeze.
So you are coming back, I think, to Nietzsche, right? Turin's name is literally Turambar, the master of fate, right? But what does Turin master? Turin dies, right? His fate has been doomed, and his doom comes to pass. He dies on his own sword, having learned that everything is ash in his mouth and everything kind of wasted away. But he owned it. Right? He names himself Turambar. Right? And defies fate. He spits in Morgoth's eye. Now, you talked about parallels. Turin is Finor, right? Finor spits in Morgoth's eye, literally. He walks up to Morgoth and he says, I am the master of fate, right? I am the one who dictates what's going to happen here because I made the Silmarils even though I knew that you were evil. You didn't deceive me. That's you can argue that it's like mythologizing on the part of Finor, and he was deceived. But he's saying, no, I knew you were evil and I did it anyway because the Silmarils are so good that it was good for me to do it, even though I was deceived. And then Turin does the same thing. And then Frodo does the same thing. Frodo's big realization is this is it, right? All the way up to the swamps outside of Mordor, Frodo struggles against his fate. Why did this happen to me? You know, he tells Gandalf, why was I born? People like to quote that today, right?
Yeah.
As if...
Yeah, we're recording this on the 20th here. So,
on the 20th, exactly.
Of January, yeah.
Right. So why is this happening to me? Why me? I'm just a guy, right? And then on the swamps, he tells Sam, you know what? This is it. I will carry the ring. I will take it all the way because it doesn't matter why. This is what was destined for me, and so it shall be, no matter the cost. And that's the moment that he becomes the person who can throw the ring into the volcano. In a sense, by the way, to go back to the couplets and the rhyming and all that stuff, and I'll say something about that in a second. Of course, the big rhyme is the ring and the Silmarils. Right?
Yeah, right.
And the ring is also the child of a child of a child of a child of a child of the Silmarils, right? But its temptation is the basic temptation. Are you in control of power, or is power in control of you? Right? And the grandest men and the mightiest heroes, that's the base conceit of the Lord of the Rings, are undone by power. And only the humble and the downtrodden and the meek can best power. So in a sense, by the way, this is very interesting. Frodo is the greatest hero of all time.
Yeah, right.
He's greater than Turin. He's greater than Fëanor. Two more things I want to say. One, I am one of the world's foremost Star Wars haters.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is that the quote that people always tell about George Lucas, it rhymes. And I say, that's not a problem. You're just bad at it. And then when I say that, people are like, okay, who's good at it? And I say, Tolkien. I think about the rhyming in Star Wars, which comes off as so, and forget the current trilogy, it's not him, whatever. Even in the original trilogy and the prequels, it comes off as so, for me at least, so flimsy, so lazy, so just, copy paste and so on. Whereas with Tolkien, it's like, wait, every iteration says something new. Every iteration has its own flavor and its own idea. And the last thing is, who gets to kill Morgoth?
Yeah.
Turambar does.
Right.
In the second prophecy of Mandos says that when Morgoth comes back for the end of days, for the war to end all wars, the person who will slay him is Turin. And that's because he is the master of fate, right? He is the person who walked onto the sword, right? He is, again, mega ultra Christian. If you think about all this thing, it's Christ, right? In Gethsemane, right? Saying, I will be crucified. I know what will happen to me, but it is good. Don't try to stop me. This is going to happen, right? So bringing all this together, I think that's one of the best expressions of Tolkien's craft is how he can do that rhyming without it seeming trite, and instead adding depth with each repetition.
No, totally. This is funny that we're talking about this one because we're talking about a Star Wars book next time.
To be fair, Star Wars is so big.
Yeah,
it's
so big.
Much bigger than George Lucas.
We're going to be talking about these problems, but I'm setting myself up to get hit by like multiple, wiki managing fans out there. Setting myself up. We don't have time to talk about death,
which is what we wanted to talk about.
That's what we wanted to talk about death and the way that there's something really interesting here, and I think critical to the elves versus men distinction.
Yeah,
is that Tolkien does want to say something about death. Death is a gift. Death is something that shouldn't be full of fear, but was made full of fear. And, we've talked about this. Boy, we don't have time to get into this. One of the things that really fascinated me every time I read this, and particularly in the last, 8-10 years, is the Númenórean downfall as the longing for immortality, right? Yeah. And the foolish desire to never let go and to have it all. Where's this line? Yeah, there's this line talking towards the end where we're at the peak, and it says, nonetheless, for long it seemed to the Númenóreans that they prospered, and if they were not increased in happiness, yet they grew more strong, and their rich men ever richer. And, they're suckered in by grifters, right? By people who have like a live forever potion, right? Like the reason Sauron can take them over is because these old, incredibly powerful, rich, wealthy men refuse to admit that they will die. And they will absolutely, literally wreck the world rather than just admit that they're mortal.
By the by, that's one of the only good things that the Rings of Power did. The
Oh
show
yeah.
is what's his face, Al Farazon or whatever,
Yeah.
the guy who brings down Numenor with his
Hmm.
promises of power and richness and the
Hmm.
past
They
coming to
they
life
got
again.
they got Jeff Bezos to like come in and play that role. All right, we don't have time to get into necropolitics, I guess.
We can leave
Last
it as an exercise to the listener to
I
think
know.
about.
Think about how the first time you heard the phrase death cult, suddenly America made sense to you. That's kind of what the last like third of the Silmarillion is. So the other thing I want to jump back to just a minor, I don't know how much I have to say about it substantively, but a thing that I love, 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 love about the Silmarillion and that I've thought about a lot in my life in a lot of different avenues is this idea of creation being an act that is always imperfect. And it's sort of like repeated at multiple stages here, where, in the beginning, they hear the music of what, like, sort of like the theme that the world is going to be. And that gets messed up and they kind of try to fix it. And then when they're physically making the world, that's the image that always sticks for me is that, like, the Vala, they raise mountains and Melkor throws them down and they make oceans and Melkor spills them. And like everything they're doing, they're constantly fighting against someone trying to mess it up. But nevertheless, the world slowly becomes firm. And this idea that like it's always Arda Mard, right? It's always a world that is not quite what it was supposed to be, but that the way it becomes firm, the way it becomes kind of whole and solid is through people trying to do the best they can, even when it gets messed up, and just putting that out there. And so much of Tolkien's stuff at a sort of background level to me feels like the meditations of someone who was very creative and had a hell of a time getting anything finished and out the door, right? And in fact, did not finish the Silmarillion and get it out the door. But so much his stuff often to me feels like someone who's really concerned with craft and really interested in creating and thinking about that process. And so much of the Silmarillion is about not that the perfect is the enemy of good. That's not the moral of this, but just this idea that the perfection will never happen in reality, but reality will happen, and that's still where the important thing is, and getting it out there even when it's marred, even when it's screwed up. That's one of those things that kind of, I don't know, gives me hope when I'm feeling really low.
I want to say one last thing on this subject, and I love that we're ending on this because it's one of my favorite things to tell people about. When you read The Lord of the Rings and anybody says the songs of old, the tales of old, they're talking about the Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien is actually referencing himself in those
Mm-hmm.
moments. There's this beautiful part in Unfinished Tales, which is an earlier, more raw version of the Silmarillion. You don't have to read it. I promise you don't have to read it. But there are things to glean from it if you do want to read it.
Yeah.
And one of them is that Tolkien uses the classic conceit of a storyteller in the narrative telling the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And there are multiple parts where he tells a story and someone says, that's not how I know this story. And the storyteller says, well, I know the tales of old. Right? I know the old versions of these tales. And there's something so beautiful about Tolkien saying, the way that you were told these stories are wrong. I know a better version of this story, which is how it was when I read it or when I was told it, right? You could see that as like, old man yelling at cloud or whatever, but I see it as someone saying, I love these stories so much, and you're telling them wrong. You're accentuating the wrong parts. I would like to tell you about Siegfried and the Kalivela and the Mabigonion and Arthur and so on, and stress the small, and stress sadness, and stress hope, instead of Excalibur being a cool sword, or the dragon and Siegfried being this giant creature or whatever. I just want you to go back to these stories and how tender they can be, and how sad and hopeful they can be, and so on. Actually, if you want to experience all of this, and I promise this last thing I want to say, the entity that actually did the best job, I think, outside of Tolkien to capture this feeling is Blind Guardian, a power metal band.
Okay.
They wrote an entire album called Nightfall in Middle-earth, which tells the Silmarillion all the way to a specific part of it, the Battle of a Number of Tears, basically, if I recall correctly. But they actually have a song, not from Nightfall, called The Bard's Song. just listen to the Bard song.
Okay.
And it says everything. It really captures that feeling of the lost story and the better way to tell it and so on that Tolkien had.
Oh, that's very cool. I had in my notes to check with you to make sure you're familiar with the dope smoker edit of the Hobbit. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, for sure.
On my list. Awesome. This has been great. I have so many notes here, like in the doc and written down.
We could spend like hours more talking about
and
this.
People do. I do want to shout out Baron being a vegetarian. Don't have anything else to say about it. Just represent. You know, if you have to creep through the wastes of the enemy, you know, beringed with spies. And let's be honest, Eden, we are all going to have to creep through the wastes of the enemy, beringed with spies. You want to have the friends of the creatures that creep and crawl and fly about the earth. Yeah, that's a good idea. You know, I'm kind of like making jokes about like the digs of people who get really into the lore and stuff because I get it. You know, I get it. It's there. It's fun. It's cool to read that. But I do think that one of the things that the video games and the TV shows and the less said about the Hobbit trilogy, the better. You know, the adaptations, nothing really against them. But the thing that I think they're at risk of taking away from people is the kind of like philosophical and spiritual solace and ideas, and even the political stuff that, like, you know, we've talked about. You know, there's a lot of conservative stuff in here, but there's a lot of stuff in here that I think, boy, this is like way too big to get into. But there's this way that like small c conservatism has like realms of hope in it that have been lost by like the big C evils that are in control of America right now, right? And rise elsewhere. You know, think of like Tolkien would totally have been into the Luddites, right? And they were like small C conservatism, but that's like union power and like thinking about how we maintain our ways of life. You know, I'm not making a pitch for listeners to read Tolkien and become more conservative, but there's something even politically hopeful in the Silmarillion in a way that I think is really good right now. So
agreed.
And especially given how many of the horrific powers in the world right now seem to be using Tolkien as very evil inspiration.
There's a lot of words written on what they miss and why they do it and why they choose Tolkien. But you can already see it between the lines of what we spoke about, right? Like if you name your company after Anduril of all things, you have not understood Anduril as a metaphor. Right?
But you've also sort of like re-enshrined the little possibility of Western chauvinism that is in here, right? And like, the flame of the West, only bad. Yeah. Well, on that cheerful note, here on this horrifically dark and snowy January day, Eden, thanks so much. This was a blast.
Thank you.
Before we get going, anything else you want to share that you're working on, things you're excited about? Tell listeners to look you up in some way or other?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing you can look up is Death Sentence. If you like these kinds of deep dives into literature and so on, I feel like we just had a very strong series of episodes, and we're just about to cover one of the books I'm most excited to cover, which is Forgotten Work. It's a sci-fi verse poem about obscure albums and how they're forgotten and the cults that they create. So you can look out for that. Heavy Blog is Heavy is always good to check out if you're looking for more music. Not just metal, we cover everything. That's it. I'm on Blue Sky. If you want to say hello, I'm a nice guy, more or less. That's it.
Cool. No, this is really great. I'm really glad we got a chance to.
This was a blast.
Yeah, I was intimidated to do the Silmarillion in such a short time, but it is just nice to touch in about it. And
it was a pleasure.
Yeah, listeners, check out Death Sentence, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabrielle Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is very cool of you. Go to patreon.com/ancillary review to become a backer. If you buy books through our show notes, we get a cut. Leaving a rating or a comment on whatever platform you listen on would be most appreciated. Questions, suggestions, notes about things we got wrong, drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com. You can also find us on Blue Sky. We mentioned Tansy Gardam's podcast Going Rogue in today's discussion. Shortly after we recorded this episode, Gardam released a bonus episode brilliantly laying out some of why Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy is so great. So if you need a palate cleanser after listening to me hating on the films, definitely check that out. Next time, Dan Hartland is coming back to talk about Timothy Zahn's Star Wars tie-in novel, Heir to the Empire, with lots of thoughts about adaptations and franchises. If you want to read ahead, check out our website for upcoming titles and guests. We've got some good ones coming. Until then, take care out there.